Welcome to what might be the best costume I think I've ever done. I normally show them at the beginning, but this time I think it's worth the wait to actually see how this thing turns out. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Hello and welcome to another video. Again, another Ben 10 custom. I know this is kind of what you guys are here for the most part. So getting straight into it, this is the McFarlane Riddler, his final suit from one of the older movies. And we're going to be kicking straight off with the paint again like I did in the last video. And surprise, surprise, there is a lot of high coat going on here. So I've got the white primer, I've got the gloss black, and then where I usually use a matte lacquer, I'm going to be using, it just says clear lacquer, but this is a gloss. Someone recommended that I do upgrade glossy, and to honour the original toy and the fact that he's a liquid, I'm going to go with that. I'm also going to be using this fluorescent green, and for those of you screaming at the screens that it's not the correct shade, you'll see why I'm using this particular green later. I'm also going to need a fair bit of masking apparatus, so I've got your standard masking tape, I've also got the very thin stuff, and I've got this liquid mask, which is basically just liquid latex, but you know, it is what it is. Now this is the Milliput that I'm going to be using. I was originally going to use white, but I decided I was actually going to use black for this, because the black is newer, and I think there's less chance of there being an issue with the hardener on this set, which is not something I want to encounter with such a tight deadline for this custom. Now, taking a look at this figure, I've already gone and done some prep to it, so I've already removed the head and obviously the head joint as well. I'm not going to be needing it, which is a shame because this is actually a really good head sculpt. I know McFarlane have some dodgy heads. This one's pretty damn good, so it's a shame to kind of not be using it. I've also popped his arm joints out, so the actual sockets where these would attach to, I've pushed out from the body, so there's just a hole that runs all the way through now. I've also gone and taken the odd bit of plastic out just to make range of movement a bit better, but I will be showing you where that is and kind of what I've done to fix that. Now all I'm doing here is trying to size up whereabouts I want these shoulders to sit. Obviously Upgrade doesn't have the squared off shoulder look. He's almost droplet-like in shape. He's very rounded, he's very smooth. Very liquid-like again. So I kind of want the form to continue without interrupting any of it too much. And obviously there's this big gap back here. And now in a second you can see that hole that runs all the way through where I've popped those joints out. And that's just a bit of heat that I used to do that. But now trying to see if I can wedge these both in so I can get a look at it without my hands being in the way. And there we go. That's somewhat what I'm going for with these. But obviously the ball joints are in the way. And there's a little bit excess at the front that I think is going to get in the way of movement. So I'm just going to take a scalpel and cut that excess out. Which you can see here. It hasn't affected the overall look too much. But I think this will mean he can get his arms further in front of him than he could before. And as I just mentioned, these ball pegs are colliding inside that hole in the torso, so I'm just going to chop them off and turn this into a straight peg, because I'm not going to be adding a butterfly joint back into this. That'd be a bit of a nightmare with the design and paint rub and whatnot. So bringing him back in, I can now test how the shoulders kind of fit in there, whether he has the proportions that I'm looking for to get started with at least. And yeah, I'm fairly happy with that. It's got the kind of rounded look, it slopes from his shoulders into his neck, and it rounds out the way I was looking for. So I think I'm ready to get started with the actual kind of modelling of this. Now you can also see in there I've gone and hollowed out some excess room in the neck. That's just so that I can swap heads easier later. It just means it's not quite as tight of a fit. And same down here, I've gone and hollowed out quite a bit and taken a big chunk out of the front. That's so it's got a lot more range and it's easier to pop the joints apart, which again is for a reason you'll see later, or in the thumbnail I suppose. I did remove a little bit of plastic from the upper torso. That was just to give a tiny bit more range of movement. As you can see here, it won't pop apart very easily, and that doesn't really bother me because that wasn't the point of removing that plastic. Now the issue I have with the neck is he's got a very obvious Adam's apple. And it also goes into a collar, which is quite well sculpted, and I obviously don't want that collar to be very obvious. So I'm going to sand away as much as I can, and obviously do some resculpting. I've also taken some of the material out from his armpits, and sanded that down, just so his arms can lay a bit flatter by his side, because I noticed that the way I'd repositioned them meant his arms were kind of flaring out more than I wanted them to. But now that that's all done, you can see I've taken a tiny bit more off the top of that neck as well. It's time to bring in that black Milliput, which is a 2-part epoxy, which you can see I've already mixed. And it's a little bit powdery, which tells me it's slightly on the old side, because I don't remember it being like that before. But it does end up working just fine, it just takes a bit more mixing. And here you can see how I've put it onto the body, using water just to smooth it out a bit. And now I have over sculpted the back and the actual socket area. That's completely fine. Once this is hardened, I'm going to sand it down using my rotary tool and give it a nice rounded, smoother look, and then finish it off with some sandpaper. I've also taken that time to carve his triangle kind of bit at his neck, which you can see here. I didn't need to do this, I could have just masked it off and painted it, which was my original plan, but this fixes kind of 2 birds with 1 stone situation. Now there's the rotary bit that I'm going to use to fix the socket in his shoulders, and obviously the sandpaper to smooth it all out. I did end up using a just round sanding drum as well, just to kind of take some of the high points off. And you can see here, it's sanded, it doesn't look a whole lot different. It will do once it's painted, you'll see that it's a lot smoother and it blends in with the body a bit better. But there we go, it takes the actual arm joint, and this is exactly what I'm going for. It takes it in, it rounds out the shape, and it actually maintains a really nice tight fit. Now you'll see I've also removed his forearms, and obviously I'm going to be replacing those because it's Upgrade. And Upgrade has some pretty unique, pretty big, bulky forearm hand situation going on. But you can see here the actual range of movement going on at these joints is still pretty good. It's not really affected a whole lot apart from obviously losing the butterfly joint. The rotation's good, the hinge is good, and the actual fit of those joints is quite nice too. So you can see here it's got these ridges on it, which is to give a ratchet to the joint. Those are going to mess up the 3D print, and it makes it really hard to move in general, because these are a bit too severe. So I'm just going to cut those off with a scalpel. I'm really not a big fan of ratchet joints like that. I know Marvel Legends have them. I tend to try and soften them up when I get them. But the ones on this figure were particularly hard, so I cut them off of every joint that I separated. And it works a lot nicer now. I don't know quite why they were so heavy, but they were. But anyway, moving on to the legs now. And you can see this is the hip setup, which is quite strange and makes it a little bit difficult to work with. But it'll work just fine. It's just a bit different to the normal Marvel Legends setup. And this crotch piece could be problematic to paint because of how rubbery it is. This has a lot of flex. It won't have that much flex by the end of the process, but just to make sure it doesn't have to flex as much when the legs bend, I'm going to cut a little bit of excess plastic out of there. This does not ruin the effect at all. This hasn't now got a big gap. You can see there this is going to keep in line with the seam, and surprisingly it doesn't cause it to catch on the joint when I move it around. It still sits flush, it still moves underneath. I managed to somehow eyeball the perfect amount to remove, and I'm very thankful for that. Now, one thing I love about Hi-Coat, and again, Hi-Coat, please sponsor me, I talk so much good stuff about your paint. They're extremely flexible, which is what I find really surprising. So that rubbery part you'll see later maintains the rubberiness and the paint doesn't crack. Or it hasn't cracked so far on me at least. So Hi-Coat's got some good flexibility to it compared to most paints. Now bringing in my hot cauldron here. What I want to do is I want to chop these legs up a bit just so I want to work on them to make them more Upgrade proportional. And you can see me there almost putting my hand straight into boiling water, because I forgot to bring a utensil up with me to actually fish everything out, so I'm just going to use my pliers and hope they don't rust. It's also much harder to get things out of boiling water with pliers, because they're not normally the right shape or size to pick things like this up. But you can see there I've cut his legs off, or at least just under his knee. So from the calf down he now has no legs, no feet. And what I have done is I've misjudged how much I need to cut off, and I've not taken enough off of his left leg. So keeping him just warm enough so that the plastic softens up. This is a very good tip if you're kind of new to customizing. Hot plastic is much easier to cut through, which is why if I'm doing something like this I tend to heat it up because the blade just goes through it so much smoother. You get a lot less resistance. and then correcting a slight angle that I put in that cut by accident. You can see now he stands a lot straighter. Still not perfect, but that's something that I can fix later on because I've got a lot more modifications to do to these legs. But you can see there, he does stand up just like this. And I could call this a day. I could kind of just round out these, make them look a bit nicer and go, yep, that'll do for his legs. But his knee joint being so far down his leg really bothers me. It just doesn't seem right. The proportions seem all wrong. And I'm just not a fan. So I'm going to put him back in that hot water. Bring the cauldron back in. And then I'm going to tear him apart and chop him up a bit more. So taking him back out now. Heating him up mainly so I can remove those hip joints from him. And then chucking it back in the cauldron so that I can heat it up enough to cut through. Forgetting my utensil again, and so just burning my fingers a little bit. At this point this isn't boiling water, but it's uncomfortably hot water. So it isn't comfortable to have my fingers in there at all. And you'll see they're going a little bit red, but that's completely fine. You'll see I've now got a plaster. I did cut into my finger again while chopping these up. It's a common occurrence at this point, but I have bought a new pack of plasters, so we're all good. Now I want the joint from this ankle, and I'm going to integrate all these chopped up bits. I'm going to reorganize the parts a little bit. So utilizing those parts, some sandpaper, my rotary tool, and a decent chunk of super glue, we end up with this. This was a lot of work to get right. You can see that bit that I took out from the middle of his thigh is now his foot. I've joined the lower leg and the upper part of his thigh together and filled all the hole with super glue and then sanded it back smooth. And that's how I'm going to be doing his legs. But now here's everyone's favourite part, onto the 3D modelling side of things. So this is Tinkercad, and you can see here this is my absolute mess of an upgrade model. Obviously spliced between Blender, then Tinkercad, and then Blender again, and then Tinkercad. So the original model for this was done in Blender, the actual sculptive upgrade, and then imported in. So let me walk you through how this whole kind of design system worked. I've gone through this a very complicated way because I changed my choices so many times through the process of the months I've been working on this. So obviously the grey bit is the original Blender model that I imported into Tinkercad. Just freehand sculpted it. This is a new model option they have in Tinkercad, or new to me, I've not used Tinkercad in a while. And this is a mix of different sketches and different shapes that I've put together to kind of cut away where the white area is. And let me show you why I like this shape or form that they've added so much. So it's called a sketch. You can see it's got like the little scribe symbol there. And this works the way most 3D modeling systems do. You draw a thing, you can round it, you can add hard corners, you can soften them. And then once you've got your thing, you can extrude it. And obviously you can warp it the same way you do in most 3D modeling softwares, just less complicated. And obviously you can do some other bits with that new system. But back to the main thing here. So what I've done is I've used those scribbles that I made to separate the white from the black. And these little cylinders here are just the holes that I'm using. So that tall one is for the peg that goes into his arms. And that little one is for the magnets that I'm going to be using. Those are 5mm by 3mm magnets. And then this here is his crotch, which again you'll see later. There is a reason I've done this. You'll understand in a minute. And these are all the joint systems I made for his head, prototyping and deciding what I was going to do. So going back into Blender, here are the 3D models for the head that I did. Obviously utilising a mix of the Tinkercad stuff that I've combined here. Here's the neck joint that would have fit on top of the McFarlane joint, but that would have made his head really high up and quite difficult to manoeuvre. This is a replica of what his neck system currently looks like. And so this is the ball peg that I ended up putting into the head that connects down into the neck, which is obviously the inverted system of what you normally get. But it's the most effective I found. Then moving on to his arm, or arms I suppose, I did make 3 variations. This bit at the top is probably the most important part, so I used the Creality Otter Lite 3D scanner, and I scanned the Riddler's upper arm and shoulder joint. This meant I could measure from the 3D scan and use it for visual reference in the 3D modelling of his lower arms. Highly recommend getting a 3D scanner if you can. They're really helpful. Obviously you can do this kind of work without a scanner, it just makes it a little bit more difficult for eyeballing stuff like this. So here's the bit that's going to connect to the Riddler's arm, and this obviously started off as a model for the forearm that I've spliced, made that upper section, added the holes so it fits the arm, and then made the cylinder that will take the magnet that also plugs into the hand arm section thing. And if you're wondering how I've done those inlays for the green, it's basically I've taken all these green lines that I've layered up in Tinkercad, put them through into Blender, Boolean differenced them from the main mesh, which is the white one here, that then curves it to the shape, then redone it and Boolean differenced it into the black part, which inlays it, and then combined the white part that's separated from the black and the black part while rounding the edges so it gives you the definitive line of black and white. It's a bit of a brain teaser, to be honest, but it took me a while, but I got there, and you can see there is a line that divides where the black and white goes, and that's basically my two mesh models that I've merged together to make one. Which is kind of better shown here. So while this white is the main blend, the black is the separated one, and then to get three, I've got the original white blend, Boolean difference the black from the white, and that gives me the white section, the black section, and the original sculpt that I did. Very complicated, I know. There was definitely a much easier way of doing this, but I chose this way. And it's worked, it just took me a bit longer and a bit more brain fuzz in the process. Now this is an additional part for him that I don't know if it was ever used in the original series, like the animated stuff, I don't think it was. But it was definitely used as promotional artwork or just artwork alongside the animated series in general. But what I used to make this rather than sculpting the whole thing from scratch, you can see this is one of the models I used, and this is a more recent model, you can see 2025 there. And then this is the other model I've used. Slightly older, I think this is 2018. But if you wanted to use these models yourself, they're very good. Obviously credit to the artists shown here. And it's from Thingiverse, so it's free to download. And I've remixed it quite a bit to make it work for what I'm doing. And it kind of blends in quite well with those two different designs. So taking those and taking this crotch piece that I made, blending them together, I obviously created the swells that come up from the puddle in the bottom and blend into that crotch, which you will now see here. And I actually printed this flat on the base, which worked surprisingly well. It's quite difficult to scrape off, obviously, printing something like this flat. But it also means that I know it's going to sit flat once it's printed and cured and washed and whatnot. This isn't a part I wanted wobbling around if it was uneven from warping and printing, so at least I know if it's flat on the base, it prints flat. Also means I don't have to mess around with supports, so I did make sure there were no overhangs on this when I printed it. Then here are our hands, and I printed it in white, which doesn't really matter. I could have done it in black, I suppose, because I'm priming white anyway. Just makes it easier, I don't have to do as many coats of white to get a good white. And you'll see there all the details that have come out. I printed these on the Mars 5 Ultra, which is just the resin printer that I keep all my white resin in. My Mars 4 tends to keep all of the black resin, and then the Mars 3 tends to keep all of the random resin that I'm printing in. Now here you can see the actual magnets I've put in. Again, these are 5mm diameter by 3mm height. And they've got a good enough strength to them. I could potentially have gone bigger, but I didn't want to mess around with having a thin wall on either side of these. And you can see here, obviously the magnets aren't going to be able to lift the whole lower arm up to the magnet, which is what I'm testing here. And evidently doesn't work, but I kept trying. And so it does have a strong enough click, though it's obviously going to pull the smaller part up. It's just that there's too much resin and too much heft to pull the whole hand upwards. But giving it a very vigorous shake test, it's a good fit. It's a very strong fit. It allows for hand rotation, it allows for easy swapping of parts. Now, getting all of these out of here and bringing all of my masking supplies in, it's time to mask up and paint. This is one of the most tedious processes I've ever done. I was up until 6:30 in the morning painting. And yes, I mean, I was up all day and then stayed up all through the night until 6:30 in the morning before going to bed. and then slept until 1 PM so that the paint had time to cure before filming this section. This was a lot of work, and it was exhausting. But hopefully you guys think the results are adequate, I suppose. I did prime this white, you can't really tell. That was like one of the least difficult bits to paint. All of this was quite difficult, masking off all the white, painting the green, masking off the green, and then painting the black. Heads were quite easy, they weren't that difficult. But here comes what I think is my best custom work to date. This thing, once I put it together and I set it down on the kitchen table, because that's where I was working, I cannot explain to you the relief that came over me. Now, fun fact, this is my favourite alien from any of the Ben 10 series, always has been, and there is obviously some paint bleeding here and there, where the masking tape just didn't kind of hold as well as I thought it would. And there's going to be some paint imperfections, but overall, this thing has come out so nicely. I am so happy with this, and again, it's got its imperfections, like there's the odd paint bleed here and there. There's the odd bit where things don't line up perfectly, like you can see where his hips go through into his legs, but the green lines line up. So the green lines up from his butt to his thighs, but it doesn't line up from his sides onto his legs. Minor issue, not too bothered. The pins don't bother me too much because they're not all the way in the black section. Now, I did also give him foot articulation, but he only has forwards and backwards. Very difficult to fit articulation in this. I could not get pivot in. I had to crunch these joints all the way down. Like, it's practically just the actual disc hinges left in there that are then glued in place. So there's no rotation there at all, it's just the front and back. But it's enough to give him the stability to stand on his own feet. You can see that if he's balanced correctly, he will. But obviously without pivot, it's quite hard to balance him properly. So luckily his hands are long enough to touch the floor. Now I do feel like his legs are maybe a slight bit too long and maybe his body's slightly too short. But this is the best I could do working with what I had. And evidently I didn't mask off quite correct there, because there's a little bit of white missing from his left arm. Our right, his left. So maybe at some point I'll fix that, but it doesn't bother me enough to fix, because when it's posed, you're never going to notice that. But obviously we're missing the Omnitrix, so I forgot to print one, and I sifted through my box of misprints, and found this one. Which is actually completely fine, it was just a spare that I printed at some point apparently. And I used the rotary tool to sand out the kind of bevel into this, or not bevel I suppose, just a curve into it, so that it conforms to his chest a bit nicer. This means I won't get any ugly gapping around like the curvature of his chest. This just fits nicely and firmly into there. And man, I am obsessed with this custom. It is not very often I will make a custom, look at its imperfections and go, I really don't care. This is quite possibly my best work. The line work, the fact that it's practically symmetrical, the way it does just look like the cartoon. He's got the correct proportions for the most part. He's got the articulation that he needs. And yeah, maybe it's just because this is my favourite alien of the series and it's such a nostalgia hit for me. But man, I am over the moon with this one. This is definitely up there, if not my best custom that I've done to date. For me, this outranks the Wolverine custom I did by quite a long shot. And you can see there, it's very easy to put these other heads on. Man, I am so happy with this. Because the white was so matte from being a primer, it's kind of gone satin rather than gloss, so the black has taken all the gloss because that was a gloss black paint. And honestly, I like it. I'm actually really happy that the white has stayed somewhat matte. It also meant I didn't have to mask it off. But yeah, very, very happy. Now you may have noticed that because I shortened the thighs, the original peg from the hip piece wasn't going to fit all the way in. I did chop that off, and then I've put a bead of super glue around the thicker part, which kind of creates its own new rib. Heated up the thighs and then popped them back on. So that's why the thighs don't just fall off when you rotate it. But here you can see how flexible that piece has remained. And don't get me wrong, this is, at this point, maybe 10 hours of the paint curing, and you're meant to give it 24 for it to properly, fully harden. But normally with any other paint, you'd see cracking here. This would be cracking and chipping and flaking by now. Not an ounce of cracking. I am very, very happy with it. High coat all the way. And then popping this on, I can recreate that artwork that I've loved so much since I was a kid. And it blends pretty well as well. Obviously I didn't do the green on this goopy effect at the bottom. I didn't want the green lines on it. Because that would have meant masking off a hell of a lot of intricate kind of tentacly bits, just to then spray that little section green and then mask off the little green bits to do the black. So it made more sense just to keep that black, kind of the goopy liquid that you see on the back there. And this is the artwork I was talking about. For whatever reason, that is ingrained in my brain with Upgrade, that weird goopy effect. I think maybe I had a temporary tattoo of it as a child, but yeah, absolutely love that artwork and wanted to make a piece that would recreate it for the model itself. And I think it came out pretty well. I don't think it looks as good as the legs. Despite my nostalgia and my love for this design, I know the legs look better. I think his feet look a bit weird because he's got such like big clearance, so that he's got that articulation. I know that a lot of people have made it completely smooth, just stumps down to his feet, but I wanted to have a bit more range of movement to him than just the stumps, which obviously I've sacrificed a bit of aesthetics for, but I think it was worth it in the end. Now bringing him back in, fully assembled, and again, so overwhelmingly happy with this, but this is the reason I used the green paint I did. So this is a UV torch, and you can hopefully see that the green glows so brightly with this torch. It glows brighter in person, believe it or not, than on camera, but it is phenomenal when you look at the fact that it's all black, all white, and then the green just pops the second you get a UV light on it. So taking him for a spin here, giving you a full 360 view, you can see what I mean about the gloss being super gloss on the black, and it being more of a satin on the white. And I actually love that it does that. I'm quite happy with that. I did really debate making him a full matte finish, but I think the gloss satin mix works really, really nicely. And you can see he poses really nicely as well. He's got that good range, and it's just, yeah, I can't put into words how happy I am with this custom. I'm fairly happy with most of my customs nowadays, but this one is, I was over the moon with this one when I finally finished it. So now adding him to the shelf, I did repose him in the end. I gave him his legs back, which kind of helped with the size difference. He does scale a tiny bit small, obviously because he's missing a decent chunk of his leg from the calf down. But yeah, over the moon with this guy. Next up is Ghost Freak, and maybe a V2 of Heat Blast, because I'm not sure how I feel about his design now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.